Mansell has won the British Grand Prix.
Hello and welcome to another review video. First of all, I'd like to thank you all generously for your trusty following. We have reached the 1k subscribers mark not too long ago, which is pretty amazing, and I hadn't addressed it in a video yet, so here we go. I'm still quite puzzled by how many people like to hear me ramble about these model cars, but it's nice to see a whole lot of you seem to enjoy it somehow. So big thanks and stay tuned as there is a lot more to come. So for this review I have here a rather special model, I think, from Minichamps. This is the Resin 1/18th version of the Williams Honda FW11b as driven by Nigel Mansell to victory at the 1987 British Grand Prix. As always, I'll give you my thoughts about this model car, what I like about it and what I think could be improved. Before we start, I'll give you a little explanation onto why I bought this model in the first place. I think it has a really cool backstory. If you're only here for the model car review, you can skip on through straight to the model info chapter in the timeline below. The 1987 British Grand Prix was one of these true Formula 1 classics. If you've never seen it, I strongly suggest you look up the highlights, or full race for that matter. You certainly won't regret it. This edition of the British Grand Prix was held at Silverstone as opposed to the previous year's race, which took place at Brands Hatch. That race was dominated by Briton Nigel Mansell, and it was quite an emotional win too. It was Nigel's first win at home. Well, technically he also won the year before in 1985, but that was then the European Grand Prix. But it was also the weekend Sir Frank Williams returned to the paddock after his life-changing accident in the south of France. For the 1987 race, Mansell was again seen as the hot favourite for the win. His Brazilian teammate Nelson Piquet his biggest threat. The Williams Honda machinery, the venerable FW11b, was the car to have. Its predecessor, the 86 FW11, was already the best car that year, having won the Constructors' title by 45 points over McLaren. They narrowly missed out on the Drivers' title though, with Mansell having that iconic tyre blowout at the last round in Adelaide. The opposition was not as strong anymore in 87, and it was quickly clear it would become an intra-team battle at Williams for that year's title. Mansell was a crowd's favourite for sure. He was a hard-working blue-collar class driver who had worked his way up the ranks to finally get a chance at title glory. The 86 title heartbreak only strengthened that image. His teammate Piquet, already a two-time champion at the time, was a laid-back Brazilian living a playboy life seemingly without a care in the world. Mansell though was generally the faster of the two, but Piquet was far more consistent. The biggest problem, however, was that both drivers hated each other. Mansell had the nationality on his side within the British team, but engine manufacturer Honda had strong links with Piquet. Team bosses Frank Williams and Patrick Head both had a soft spot for Nigel's work ethic, but Piquet was seen as the best bet for a title as he was fast and consistent. Their rivalry really was something out of a book, with Piquet running his big mouth, playing mind games all the time, getting under Mansell's skin. Their feud cost both drivers a good chance at the 1986 world title, and was again jeopardizing their chances in 87. Nigel thus wanted to make a statement to Piquet at Silverstone. On Saturday, however, he just failed to pip his teammate, who took pole for the race by the narrowest of margins. Come Sunday, the Williams cars were again class of the field. Alain Prost did take the lead at the start, but it wasn't long until both Williams of Piquet and Mansell drove past the McLaren. It looked like Piquet controlled the race thereafter, leading his teammate Mansell by a few seconds. Originally, the Williams team didn't plan to let the drivers make a pit stop, but on lap 35, Nigel decided to come in for fresh rubber. When Mansell rejoined the track, he was around 29 seconds adrift from his teammate. On fresh rubber though, and spurred on by the partisan crowd, he quickly made inroads on Piquet. He caught the Brazilian with 3 laps to go and got into his slipstream at Hanger Straight. Nelson was driving in his mirrors, and this allowed Nigel to sell him the dummy around the outside and make his move on the inside of Stowe Corner. The crowd went berserk, and Nigel took an emphatic home win, responding to his rival's taunts on the track. Mansell, however, would miss out again on the title that season, a crash during qualifying for the Japanese Grand Prix injuring his back and thus taking him out of the title battle. This effectively gifted the World Championship to Piquet. He did win 6 races as opposed to Piquet's 3, but Nelson was far more consistent. Nigel finally took a well-deserved title in 1992 with Williams. He went on to win the IndyCar Championship too the following year, making him the only person to be the reigning Formula 1 World Champion and IndyCar Champion at the same time. Minichamps released this model back in 2016. I actually already had this model in my collection, but sold it a few years ago. I also had his teammate Nelson Piquet's car, which I kept then for a while. At the time I was trying to have a 1/18th World Champions collection, but I now stepped away from that thought, so the Piquet model has been sold too in the meantime. About a week ago I was looking to add the Mansell version again to my collection and was lucky enough to find one at the original retail price still. This was a lucky find, as this model normally goes for a lot of money on the likes of eBay. Minichamps produced two different versions of the 1987 FW11b, a Nelson Piquet World Champion car from the Japanese Grand Prix, and then this Mansell British Grand Prix winner. Both models are slightly different as they are from different races. The Piquet version has a few different sponsors here and there. It also features tobacco advertisement as opposed to the British Grand Prix version where tobacco sponsorship was traditionally banned. The body of the car is also a bit different. The Piquet model has these air intake periscopes on the side pods, and the roll hoop is also visibly shorter than on the Mansell car. Both Spark and GP replicas also produced versions of the FW11b. They also made several 1986 FW11 versions, as did Minichamps, but I don't think any of them have also made this specific Mansell 1987 British Grand Prix winner. GP replicas have announced a Mansell 1987 San Marino Grand Prix version though, but I think this British Grand Prix winner is still the most iconic one, even though the 87 Piquet is a World Champions car. Looking at the resale value, the Mansell model is much more sought after. None of the other brands that I mentioned made versions with driver figurine in it. Minichamps are the only ones to do so. Now, buying models I already owned at one point is something I actually do more often. I sometimes regret selling them and then want to buy them back. Here you can see quite a few examples of that. Luckily, I have always found them again at a lower price than I sold them all these years ago. The model is a Minichamps Formula 1 1/18th Resin and thus comes with the regular packaging they always use. It's just a black Minichamps branded box with a checkered flag pattern on it. The model info then comes on a sticker, and all of the Minichamps info and licensing stuff is on the bottom together with the barcode as usual. Here you can also see this is a Resin model. Inside, same usual stuff. A styro clamshell with these protective plastic pieces inside. The model then is presented on the usual base with a chrome plaque with the car's info on it. The first impression you get from this model is rather good. This iconic Williams livery looks great, certainly in combination with the very recognizable Mansell helmet. The proportions of the model itself looks on point, I think. The wheels don't look too big or too small, and there are some finer details visible immediately, like this small tube here on the driver's helmet, or the detail on the rear suspension. I must say Minichamps have made some good 1980s models in the past, like this Benetton B186 for example, or the 1984 Tyrrell 012. At first sight, this Williams model here follows that positive trend. So yeah, you immediately get a good feeling about this model car. The biggest con for me on this model is the lack of cuts in the front and rear wing elements. I think it would have been quite straightforward to add this detail, especially on the front wing, where there are only these two big elements. It shouldn't be too hard to cut out the slit in between the flap and the main plane. When the model was released though, Minichamps simply didn't add this kind of detail to their 1/18th models, so it's no real surprise. But I mean, it would have looked a lot nicer, that's all. Now I can understand it more on the rear wing, as there are three upper elements you then have to cut out. Also, it doesn't look too bad as it is, I have to say. Weirdly enough though, the lower rear wing beams do have a small slit in between these two elements, so I mean, yeah, where's the logic in that? I'd rather cut out the upper ones as they are much more visible, but yeah. Another thing I don't really like is the visor decal used on the helmet. I know I mention it every time I review a Minichamps model, but I'll keep on doing so until they stop making these crappy brown visors. And that is basically it for the cons. There really aren't many on this model. This is also the reason I bought it for the second time. I mean, I wouldn't do that with a model that has many flaws. One area where it is lacking compared to the GP replicas though are the small rivets on the side pods. They could have added some simple decals even. They don't necessarily have to be photo etched pieces. It's not like it's a detail that is terribly missed, but it would have added some extra value to this model, I think. Let's look at the positives then, and as you guessed, there are quite a few of those I found on this model car. I've already explained the iconic look and the emotional bond I have with this model due to its fascinating backstory. I'll now show you some of the finer details that are pretty amazing too. The best part of the model for me is the cockpit. The driver's helmet looks pretty nice. The shape is a generic one but looks more or less accurate. Shame about the brown visor of course, but on this model it's actually not as bad as usual. Normally it represents the whole visor, whereas here they try to make out a clear visor with the brown part being the inside of the eye port. You can clearly see the outline of a visor on the helmet. The decals themselves do look great though, and make the helmet look good despite the terrible visor. I really like the white life support tube attached to Nigel's helmet, and this was also added to the PK version, but in fact Nelson didn't have this tube on his helmet, so that version is a bit wrong. The low cutout cockpit then allows for a good view on the figurine inside. I like how Mansell had a different color overalls compared to his teammate PK's beige ones. The decals on it look pretty clear and accurate. A small thing I would have added too is the Union Jack just above the right knee of the driver to make it complete, although admittedly it would be barely visible. The seat belts then look okay, they're just plastic ones, but they have these nice black metallic details added to them. The belts themselves are also in the correct red color. The dashboard and steering wheel are pretty plain and simple. The decals on them again look nice and clear. Just past the driver's right hand you can see the gear stick lever and the linkage arm along the inside of the cockpit. On the other side of the cockpit then there are these silver star stickers, and I don't know exactly what they mean. Maybe it has something to do with how many poles and wins the driver got. Next to these stars you can also see another small lever. I think this must be for the brake balance, although I'm not really sure. In front of the cockpit then is a very fine window. The plastic they used is really thin and looks nice. Behind the driver's head then, inside the black roll hoop, is a fine red pull ring. I like that they added this small ring instead of a 2D decal or just nothing at all. And the small antenna behind it is another fine detail as well. The roll hoop itself is also noticeably longer than on the PK car, and this is in fact correct, as PK's car had a shorter roll hoop in the later part of the 1987 season than Mansell's. The wheels then, they look pretty good too, I'd say. I like the different color wheel nuts on either side of the car, so silver colored ones on the right and a sort of faded pink color on the left, and I think these pink wheel nuts should actually be red though. The ones on the Spark or GP replicas aren't the correct color either, they're silver all around, so even though this Minichamps is not correct, it's actually the closest one to the real thing. There is also some detailing visible behind the wheels too, with the brake disc and the caliper in brown with a temperature gauge on it. As usual, I added some extra details on the sidewalls of the tires. I also put a small tire valve in the rims and added the aluminium tape in the rims to replicate the wheel weights. Another part I really like are the intakes of the side pods. As you can see, the interior is actually lined in this yellow carbon fiber, and the side pods are split in two parts with a support beam for this partition wall. These little wings on the side of the cockpit is a nice piece of detail too. Even though the wing elements are not cut out, I don't think they look too bad. The front wing has a nice carbon fiber texture on it, which continues on the inside of the end plates. On the nose there are these adjustment holes to alter the angle of the upper flap, and it's just a simple decal but looks very nice, I think. The outside of the end plates then feature this rivet detailing, again simple but effective. I also like how the skirts of the end plates are curved towards the inside. The rear wing end plates then have the same rivet detailing than on the front. Here too the black parts are covered in a nice carbon fiber decal. The suspension detail and the exposed gearbox looks great, I think. I like how the springs are visible with that aluminium colored heat shield of the exhaust below it. The brake ducts then right next to the wheels look great too, with again a nice carbon fiber decal wrapped around it. The drive shaft connects to the gearbox, and the detailing on it is not too bad, with that small radiator in the front of the rear wing support pillars. Looking from the rear, there is a small light on the back of the gearbox, and then these hooks where the rear jack connects to the car. Just above that rear light is a long rod connecting the gearbox to the engine bay. I have no idea what it does, it just looks cool. I also think all these support beams for the gearbox is a nice detail. So in conclusion, I think this is a really good model car by Minichamps. Well, it's no real surprise that I think it is, as this is the second time I bought this very same model. There are a few minor things that could be better, like adding some cuts in the wing flaps on the front and the rear, or the dreary visor decal Minichamps insists on using still to this day. The lack of rivet detailing compared to the GP Replicas model could be attributed to the fact that this is a model that is already 6 years old, although I don't think if Minichamps would have released it today, it would feature that kind of detail. I found it very hard to look for cons though, as I think it has so many more pluses. The cockpit detailing is really good, the wheels look really nice, and there are some fine details here, there and everywhere. And of course, as I mentioned, it's an iconic car from a beautiful period of Formula 1, driven by a hugely popular driver to a home win in commanding style, putting one over his nemesis. I mean, what more could you ask for? Cut out wings! Okay, yeah, okay, that then. So I would like to ask you then, does this car evoke the same memories for you? Do you also really like this model, or do you prefer the Spark or GP Replicas version? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, I would like to thank you all for watching this review video. I hope you enjoyed your time. Leave a like down below if you did. Help out the channel too by subscribing to it, and if you haven't already done so, give my other videos some love too. And here's one I think you'd really like. It's about another Mansell Williams by Minichamps, the famous Senna Taxi. In the meantime, take care, and I hope to see you again soon in the next video.